The dust was thick and still, and it had been that way for hours. Nell was 5 years old, and she had been holding her mother's hand for 14 hours. Her mother was cold. Her mother was not moving. Her mother was never going to move again, and Nell knew that, had known it since before the sun went down the night before. But she held on anyway, because letting go felt like the last thing she was not ready to do. She pressed the cold fingers against her cheek, and she hummed. Not a song, just sound, just proof that she was still there, that the world had not stopped spinning, even though her whole world had stopped spinning 100 yards from the well. Before we go any further into Nell's story, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. If you believe a child should never be thrown away, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me what city you're watching from today. I want to know how far this little girl's journey travels. Now come back with me to Wyoming, summer of 1879, the day everything changed. Cole Hargrove smelled the smoke before he saw it. He had been riding since before dawn, pushing Cinder hard across the flat open country north of Denton Fork, and the smoke came to him on the east wind, thin and wrong. The kind that did not come from a cook fire or a hearth. It came from something that had been burning too long and too hot, and was now winding down into the particular silence that followed destruction. He almost rode past it. That was the truth he would carry for the rest of his life. The truth that lived right beside every good thing that came after. He almost did not turn. He was 3 days out from Denton Fork, bone-tired, running from nothing specific and everything general. And smoke on the horizon was not his business. He had made a decision 2 years ago that nothing on this earth was his business anymore, and he had kept that decision faithfully until this morning. Cinder turned before he did. The horse pulled east without being asked, ears flat and nostrils working, and Cole let her go, because Cinder had never once in 6 years pointed him wrong, and because somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the deliberate emptiness he had been cultivating like a man tending a poisonous garden, something moved, something old and inconvenient, something that felt like obligation. He heard her before he saw her, high and thin, barely there, rising and falling without words or melody, the sound a person made when they had moved past the place where words worked. He cleared the rise and pulled Cinder up short and sat very still in the saddle for a long moment, taking in what was in front of him. The homestead was gone. The cabin was a shell, roof collapsed, walls still standing on 2 sides, but meaning nothing anymore. The barn had burned cleaner, nothing left but the skeleton of the frame. The garden along the south fence had not burned, but it did not matter. Nothing here was going to be tended anymore. 4 bodies. 2 men near the barn, 1 woman by the well, 1 man on the front steps with his arms spread like he had been trying to hold something back that could not be held. Cole had seen enough of death in enough forms to read a scene like this without being told what had happened. This was not a raid gone wrong. This was not a robbery that got out of hand. This was deliberate and organized and completed by men who knew what they were doing and were not afraid of what it meant. The sound came from the well. A little girl sat beside it with her back against the stone and her knees pulled to her chest, holding a woman's hand. The woman was the body by the well, dressed in a blue work dress, and the child had arranged herself beside her as close as she could get, and she was holding the dead woman's hand against her cheek with both of her own small hands, and she was making that sound. She did not run when she saw him. She pulled her knees tighter and watched him with gray eyes that were too old and too still for her face, a face dirty and tear-streaked and sunburned along the bridge of her nose. And she kept her grip on the dead woman's hand, and she did not look away from him. He stopped 6 feet out and crouched down, bringing himself to her level. "Hey," he said. His voice came out rough from days of no talking. He cleared it. "My name's Cole." "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl said nothing. "What's your name?" A long pause. Then, so quiet he almost missed it. "Nell." "Nell. That's a good name." Her eyes dropped to his holster, then back to his face, measuring. "Those men," she said, "are they coming back?" Cole looked at the scene around him, the professional precision of it, the way there were no useful tracks because whoever had done this had known enough to come in from the rocky ground to the north. He looked back at the girl. "Not today," he said, which was the truth. The rest of it, whether today was enough, he kept to himself. "My mama won't wake up," Nell said. "I know, sweetheart. I tried. I talked to her all night. I told her to please wake up and she didn't." Her voice did not waver. It just went flat, the way voices went when they had already moved through the worst of it and come out the other side into something quieter and more terrible. Cole felt it land somewhere between his ribs and stay there. He had felt that particular pain before. He knew exactly the shape of it. "Are you thirsty?" he asked. She thought about this like it was a test. Then she nodded once, very small. He unhooked his canteen from his belt. He did not hand it to her. He set it on the ground between them and stepped back. He gave her the space to choose. She looked at the canteen. Then she looked at him. Then she reached out with one hand, the other still holding her mother's, and dragged the canteen toward herself and drank. She drank like someone who had been deciding for hours whether water still mattered and had just now made up her mind that it did. "Easy," he said softly. "Easy now. There's more where that came from." She coughed, drank again, lowered the canteen. Water had run down her chin and dripped onto the front of her dress. She held the canteen in her lap and looked at him. "Are you a good man?" she asked. Cole said nothing. He let that be what it was. "Is there anyone?" he asked after a moment. "Family? Anyone your folks were heading toward?" Nell shook her head. Then she stopped. "Uncle Warren." "Warren? What's his last name?" "Briggs." She said it the way children said names they had heard spoken with particular weight, not fear exactly, more like the sound of a word that had been used carefully around her. The way adults used words carefully when they did not want children to understand them, and underestimated how much children understood anyway. Mama said he was Papa's brother, but she said he wasn't our kind of family. What did she mean by that? Nell thought about it. She meant the kind that only comes around when they want something. She looked up at him. She said real family was the kind that stayed. Cole stayed very still for a moment. "Your mama sounds like she was smart." "She was everything," Nell said. And the simplicity of it, the total and unqualified way she said it, went through him like something cold and necessary. He spent the next hour doing what needed to be done. He did it carefully and with as much dignity as he could manage, which was the only thing a man could offer the dead. He found the tools in what remained of the barn. He chose the rise above the homestead where the ground was softer and you could see the mountains from both directions. And he told Nell what he was doing and why. And she listened and did not look away. She let go of her mother's hand when it was time. She let go and she picked up a small flat stone and held it and watched and did not cry because she had cried herself empty in the night, and what was left was something beyond tears. Cole had seen that kind before. The particular stillness that came after grief had burned through everything combustible and left only the core. He cut Ruth Cade's name into the marker with the point of his knife. Each letter slow and deliberate, and underneath it, "She ran every day. She never stopped." Nell watched him carve. When he finished, she crouched beside the stone and ran one finger over the letters. "She always said names were how you told the world someone had been here," Nell said. She said a name on stone was the world answering back. Your mama was right. Nell stood up. She reached into the collar of her dress and pulled out a chain with a small silver locket on it, dull with tarnish and worn smooth from years of handling. She looked at it in her palm for a long moment. Then she put it back against her chest and pressed her hand flat over it. "Mama gave me this," she said, "before." She did not say before what. She did not need to. Cole rose and dusted off his knees and looked out at the country around them, empty and vast and indifferent, the way the Wyoming land was always indifferent, holding its secrets with the patience of something that had never been asked to care. "Nell," he said carefully, "I need to take you somewhere safe, somewhere with a roof and food and people. I'm not leaving her. We've taken care of her. She's resting now." Nell looked at the marker. She pressed her lips together in a thin, deliberate line. Then she looked at Cole with those gray, measuring eyes. "Will you forget where she is?" "No." "Promise." "I'll carve the directions into the inside of my hat brim if I have to," he said. "So even if I forget everything else, I'll still know where she is." And Nell Cade, 5 years old, standing over her mother's grave in the Wyoming heat, described her mother's face from memory with the precision and care of someone who knew they were building something they intended to keep forever. The dark hair, the gap between her front teeth, the way she laughed with her whole chest, the scar above her left eyebrow from the winter she and Cole's father, Nell's grandfather, had an argument about a stubborn mule, and the mule had won. She talked for 10 minutes, and Cole listened to every word and did not look away once. When she finished, she looked at him steadily. "You've got it? All of it." "Okay." She reached up. She did not ask. She put her small hand in his and held on. Cole felt it go through him the way he had not felt anything go through him in 3 years. The specific weight, the warmth, the terrifying and exact weight of being trusted by something completely helpless, and the way that trust landed differently than every other kind of trust, because it came with no conditions and no escape clause, just small fingers around 2 of his, and a child deciding that this stranger on this hill was the place she was going to put her faith on this particular afternoon, because she had run out of alternatives and he had shown up when no one else had. He had not been trusted like that since Henry. He did not think about Henry. He had trained himself not to think about Henry or about Sarah. But Nell's hand undid something in him the same way a key undid a lock, quietly and without effort, and the grief came up in him fast and sharp, and he breathed through it and kept his face steady and kept walking. They rode south toward Denton Fork with Nell in the saddle in front of him, her back straight, the locket pressed under her hand, watching the land roll past. She did not lean against him. She held herself separate with a dignity that had no business being in a 5-year-old, and everything to do with what the last 24 hours had required of her. An hour into the ride, the exhaustion finally won. She sagged back against his chest, between one breath and the next, asleep before she finished falling. One fist curled around the locket chain, and Cole held himself still and careful around her, and watched the horizon the way he had been watching every horizon for 3 years. Except now, what he was looking for had changed. He was not looking for a reason anymore. He had spent 3 years out here looking for a reason to stay in the world and not finding one convincing enough. He had not expected the reason to be 5 years old and asleep against his chest, with her mouth slightly open and her hair coming loose from its braid. But here it was. Here she was. He thought about what she had said. You could always tell by what a man did when nobody was watching. Nobody had been watching. He had turned toward the smoke anyway. He did not know yet what that meant about who he was becoming, but he thought it might mean something. He thought for the first time in a long time that it might mean something worth finding out. He thought about the 4 bodies back at that homestead and the professional clean precision of it. Hired men, organized, thorough. The kind of work that cost money, which meant someone with money had paid for it, which meant the death of the Cade family was not random violence. It was purposeful. It was the beginning of something, and that something was still in motion, and the little girl asleep against his chest was somewhere in the middle of it without knowing it. He thought about Warren Briggs. He had heard that name in Denton Fork, in the saloon, in the way men spoke carefully around certain names, the same way Nell had spoken it. Warren Briggs owned half the cattle routes in the Eastern Territory. Warren Briggs had lawyers in 3 cities. Warren Briggs was the kind of man who had learned that you did not need to fire a shot if you had enough money and enough patience, because money and patience got you everything bullets got you and left no powder burns. Nell's father had owned water rights on the Bitter Creek tributary. Cole had heard about that too, back when he was still the kind of man who paid attention to that sort of thing. A small homestead with a water claim that controlled access to the best grazing land in the valley. Worth almost nothing to a family trying to build something, worth a great deal to a man who already owned everything around it. He rode and said nothing, and let the child sleep, and did the math that he had been trying not to do since he saw those boot prints in the dirt near the barn. Deliberate, experienced, the kind of men who had done this before and expected to do it again. Nell had the water rights. As the sole heir to the Cade homestead, the claim transferred to her the moment her father died. She was 5 years old. She had no guardian, no protection, no one who knew her name in any courthouse in the territory. He rode a little faster. Denton Fork came into view with the sun angling west. A crooked line of buildings along a dusty main street, the church steeple, the livery, the general store with its porch full of barrels, and the particular smell of grain and leather and horse that meant civilization of a certain grudging kind. Cole rode in slow and felt the eyes on him the way he always felt eyes in small towns. The measuring pause before people decided what to make of you. He helped Nell down from the saddle in front of the general store. She stood and blinked at the street, taking inventory with those serious gray eyes. Then she looked up at him. "Is this where we're staying?" "For now." She looked at the street again, at the people who had stopped to look at her. She was 5 years old with a dead mother's locket pressed to her chest and dried tears on her dirty face, and the expression of someone who had learned in the past 24 hours that the world could take everything from you, and was trying to decide whether this particular patch of it was going to be asked to do the same. A woman came off the general store porch. She was perhaps 60, gray-haired, built like someone who had been arguing with the frontier for decades and winning on points. She walked to Cole and looked at Nell and said without any preamble at all, "Who is this child, and what happened to her?" "Nell Cade. Her family's homestead north of here. She's the only one left." The woman looked at Nell directly. "Are you hurt, honey?" "No, ma'am." "Are you hungry?" A pause, then a very small, "Yes, ma'am." The woman looked at Cole with sharp gray eyes. "Vera Hutchkins. I run the post office and I know everything that happens in this town before it happens. And I'm telling you right now, before you say another word, that the Cade homestead is not the first piece of land to burn in this county in the past 8 months, and I have been waiting for someone to notice that besides me." Cole looked at her. "I noticed." "Good." She put her hand out to Nell. "Come on, child. Let's get you something to eat, and you can tell me what you'd like for supper. And I want to warn you that my kitchen is small, but my opinions about what constitutes a proper meal are very large." Nell looked at Vera's hand. Then she looked up at Cole. "You're not leaving." Not a question. "I'll be right here on this porch," he said. She looked at him for one more long moment with those gray eyes running their internal calculation. Then she took Vera's hand and went inside. Cole turned and looked at the street, and felt the weight of what had just happened settle around him like something he had not chosen and was not going to put down. A man leaned against the post of the hardware store across the street, arms folded, watching. He was well-dressed, expensive boots, the kind of stillness that was not relaxed but controlled, the stillness of a man accustomed to watching things unfold that he had already arranged to unfold. He met Cole's eyes across the street with no surprise and no hurry, the way a man met the eyes of someone he had been expecting and was not afraid of. Then he pushed off the post and walked away around the corner without looking back. Cole watched the corner for a long time. He did not know that man's face, but he knew that particular walk. The walk of a man who had never once in his life stood in a room and not been the most important person in it. The walk of a man who already knew how this was going to end. Cole turned back to the general store door. From inside, he could hear Vera's voice asking Nell something about biscuits, and Nell's voice answering in the careful, considered way she answered everything, like she was building each sentence one word at a time and wanted each word to be the right one. He sat down on the porch steps. He put his elbows on his knees. He looked out at the street and at the corner where the well-dressed man had gone. He had come to Denton Fork with nothing, no purpose, no plan, no reason to stay or go that mattered more than any other. He had been a man in the process of disappearing, doing it slowly and on purpose, and with some success. That was over now. From inside the store, Nell laughed. It was small and surprised, like she had forgotten she was capable of it, and had not meant to let it happen. But there it was, a child's laugh, brief and involuntary, and completely real. Cole closed his eyes for one moment. Then he opened them and watched the street and started thinking about Warren Briggs and what it was going to take to make sure that man never got within 10 feet of that little girl. Whatever it took. That was the answer. Whatever it took for however long it took. Starting right now and not stopping until it was done. He reached into his coat pocket. He had picked up the small locket chain that had slipped off Nell's neck while she slept on the ride south. He had been carrying it for an hour, waiting to give it back. He held it up in the late light. The silver caught it. On the front of the locket, small and worn but still readable, were 2 words someone had engraved there a long time ago with a careful hand. The kind of words you put on something you intended to last. Stay close. Cole folded the chain into his fist and held it. "All right," he said quietly to no one in particular, and he meant it all the way down. The morning cracked open gray and cold, the kind of Wyoming dawn that slipped under your collar and reminded you that summer was a liar. Cole woke on the floor of Vera's back room with a blanket that smelled like dried lavender and a crick in his neck that had settled in for a long visit. He sat up slow and quiet, the way he always sat up, reading the room before the room read him. Nell was still asleep in the bed, a narrow iron frame with a quilt that had been patched in 4 different colors by 4 different hands. She lay on her side with one arm tucked under the pillow and the locket visible above the blanket edge, rising and falling with each slow breath. She had not moved since he carried her in. Cole watched her for a long moment and did not think about Henry. He did not think about the other bed in the other house where another small child had slept with that same absolute surrender. He did not think about it because thinking about it was a door he had learned to keep closed, and he needed that door to stay closed right now. But the shape of the door was there in the corner of his mind, and he could feel the pressure of it, the way you felt a wall you knew was load-bearing, even when you were not looking directly at it. He stood and folded the blanket and set it on the chair. His boots made no sound on the floorboards. He had learned that particular skill in a different life, and it had followed him into this one like a shadow that did not know it was no longer needed. Vera was already at the post office counter when he came through the curtain. She had the lamp burning low and a cup of coffee in her hand, and she looked at him the way she looked at everything, directly and without apology. "She slept through," Vera said. "Didn't stir once. I checked twice." Cole nodded. He took the cup she pushed across the counter and wrapped his hands around it and let the warmth do its work. "You've got that look," Vera said. "What look?" "The look of a man who's about to do something he hasn't told anyone about yet." Cole did not answer. He drank his coffee and looked out the front window at the street, which was still empty and gray and holding its breath the way small towns held their breath before the day properly started. "I need to ride out to the Pryor place," he said. "Franklin Pryor, the family that lost their water rights 3 months back." Vera set her cup down. "You're building a case. I'm trying to understand the shape of what we're up against." "He won't talk," Vera said. "Pryor, he's a scared man. He signed a non-disclosure as part of the settlement. Briggs's lawyer drew it up. Pryor can't say a word about what happened without forfeiting the payout he got for the land. Then I'll ask him what he can say." Vera looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the same way Nell nodded, which made Cole's chest tighten in a way he did not examine. "You'll be back by dark?" "Before dark. I'll keep her here. She'll help me with the mail sorting. She's got good hands for folding." Cole almost smiled. He did not quite get there, but the attempt was present, and that was more than he had managed in most mornings over the past 3 years. He left before Nell woke. He told Vera to tell her he would be back, and he wrote it on a scrap of paper in case she needed to see it in his own hand. "Gone to talk to a man. Back before supper. Stay with Vera. I'll be here." He folded it small and set it on the table where she would see it when she sat down for breakfast. Then he saddled Cinder and rode out while the town was still buttoning itself up for the day. The Pryor homestead was south and east, a half-day ride through country that started flat and got flatter, with the mountains sitting on the horizon like a promise that never got any closer. Cole kept his eyes moving the way he always kept them moving, scanning ridge lines and draws, reading the dirt for tracks that did not belong. He saw nothing. That was the problem with men who knew what they were doing. They left nothing to see. The Pryor place was smaller than the Cade homestead had been, and it showed the marks of a family that had been slowly unpicking itself from the land. The barn door hung crooked. The corral was empty. The garden had gone to weeds in neat rows, which was the saddest kind of neglect, the kind that came from a person walking away on purpose. Franklin Pryor came out onto the porch before Cole reached the yard. He was a thin man with a wife's hands and the watchful stillness of someone who had learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. He held a shotgun low at his side, not pointed at Cole, but ready. "State your business," Pryor said. "Cole Hargrove. I'm in Denton Fork, temporary. I know who you are. Heard about the girl. Pryor's eyes did not soften. What do you want? To ask you some questions about Warren Briggs. Pryor's jaw tightened. He looked past Cole at the empty yard, then back at Cole's face. I signed papers. I can't talk about it. I'm not asking you to break your agreement. I'm asking you to tell me what you can. What happened to your water rights? How it happened? What you saw with your own eyes before the lawyers got involved. Pryor was quiet for a long moment. The shotgun did not come up, but it did not go down either. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't, Cole said. But I'm the only person who's shown up asking questions who isn't on Briggs's payroll. And I've got a 5-year-old girl who just watched her parents die because of the same pattern that cost you your land. That's all I've got. It's not much, but it's honest. Pryor looked at him for another long moment. Then he set the shotgun against the porch rail and sat down on the steps. He put his hands on his knees and stared at the ground. They came at night, he said. Not the first time. The first time was a man in a suit with papers, Clement Hale. He offered to buy the water rights at a price that was less than half of what they were worth. I said no. He came back a week later with a higher offer and a threat wrapped in the kind of language that didn't leave powder burns. I said no again. 2 weeks after that, my barn burned. Not the house, just the barn. Lost 2 horses and a season's worth of hay. The fire marshal called it accidental. I know better. But what are you going to prove? The third time Hale came, he brought a lawyer and a document that said my water rights claim had a boundary error that made it invalid. He had a surveyor's affidavit. I'd never seen the surveyor in my life, but the paper was notarized and filed. I couldn't afford the legal fight. I took the settlement and signed the non-disclosure. Pryor looked up at Cole. His eyes were tired and flat. That's what I can say. If you ask me anything about the settlement terms or what I know about Briggs's involvement, I can't answer. I signed it. I meant it. Cole nodded. He did not push. He had gotten what he needed, the pattern confirmed. The barn fire, the legal manipulation, the progression from offer to threat to destruction. It matched the Alderman place. It matched the Cade homestead, except the Cade homestead had ended in death, which meant the pattern had escalated. Or someone had resisted harder, or someone had known too much. Thank you, Cole said. Pryor nodded once, curt. That girl. She the one from the Cade place? Yes. She's lucky you showed up. Cole did not answer. He did not feel lucky. He felt like a man who had stumbled into something that was still moving, and he was trying to catch up to it. He rode back to Denton Fork with the afternoon sun on his left shoulder, and the shape of the pattern clearer in his mind. 3 homesteads, 8 months, Bitter Creek water rights, and a man who sat in the middle of it like a spider who had been doing this long enough to believe he would never get caught. Franklin Pryor had given him something else, something Pryor might not have known he was giving. The name of the surveyor on the affidavit, a man named Elijah Croft, out of Cheyenne. If Croft had signed a false affidavit, he was either corrupted or coerced. Either way, he was a thread Cole could pull. He was so deep in the thread that he almost missed the dust on the road ahead. A single rider, coming from Denton Fork at a steady pace, not hurrying, not slowing. Cole pulled Cinder up and waited. The rider resolved into Clement Hale, still in the same expensive coat, still carrying himself with the stillness of a man who had never once been surprised by anything. He reined in about 20 feet out and sat looking at Cole with the patient expression of someone who had been expecting this meeting and was ready for it. "Mr. Hargrove, I was hoping to catch you before you got back to town." Cole said nothing. "I want to make you an offer, a serious one. $500, cash, to leave Denton Fork tomorrow morning. Take the horse, take whatever you've got, ride out, and don't come back. Leave the girl with Vera Hutchkins. She'll be collected by the proper authorities within the week and placed with her family. She doesn't have family. She has a business associate of her father's who has filed a legal petition for her guardianship. That's family enough under territorial law, and you know it." Cole looked at Hale for a long moment. The wind moved between them, carrying dust and the smell of dry grass. "You burned the Pryor barn," Cole said. Hale's expression did not change. "That's a serious accusation. It's a fact, and I'm going to prove it. You're going to try. And while you're trying, I'll be filing a motion with the court to have you removed from the territory as a vagrant with no legal standing and a history that the judge will find very concerning. You think Judge Haynes will favor a drifter over a man with property and standing? I think Judge Haynes will read the letter Daniel Cade wrote before he died, naming you and Briggs by name and describing exactly what you did to his family. Something flickered behind Hale's eyes. Just a flicker, but it was there. You're bluffing. I don't bluff. I don't have enough left to bluff with. I've got the letter. I've got the water rights claim. And I've got a little girl who can stand in front of a judge and tell him what she saw. You want to bet your future on whether that's enough? Hale held his gaze for a long, flat moment. Then he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who had just decided to stop playing the current hand and start dealing a new one from a different deck. You're making a mistake, Mr. Hargrove. You're confusing courage with wisdom. They look similar from a distance, but they lead to very different outcomes. He gathered his reins. Think about my offer. It expires at sunrise. He turned his horse and rode back toward Denton Fork at the same unhurried pace, leaving Cole sitting in the dust with the weight of the conversation pressing down on him. He rode into town as the light was starting to go long and gold. The street was quiet. Supper smoke was rising from a dozen chimneys, and the sound of someone hammering in the livery carried across the evening air. He tied Cinder at the post office rail and went inside. Nell was at the counter with a stack of envelopes, sorting them by hand in a way that was too organized to be random. She looked up when he came in, and something in her face relaxed, the small release of tension that she allowed only when she saw him come through a door. "You're back," she said. "Said I would be. Vera said you went to talk to a man about the pattern." "I did." "Did he help?" "He confirmed what we already knew. It's bigger than just your family's land. It's a pattern, and it's been running for months." Nell absorbed this. She set down the envelope she was holding and pressed her hand flat on the counter. "Hale came by while you were gone," she said. "He wanted to talk to Vera. She told him you were out and she didn't know when you'd be back. He left a message for you." "What message?" "He said the offer was good until sunrise, and that he hoped you'd be sensible." Cole was quiet. Nell watched him with those gray eyes that missed nothing. "What offer?" "He offered me money to leave town, to leave you here." Nell's hand tightened on the counter. "Are you going to take it?" "No." She let out a breath, slow and deliberate. "Good," she said, "because I already told Vera I wasn't going anywhere with anyone but you." Cole looked at her. In the lamplight, with her hair coming loose from its braid and her hands still flat on the counter, she looked exactly like what she was, a child who had been forced to become an expert in trust and had made her decision about where to place it. "We need to talk," Cole said, "about what happens next." He sat down at the table, and Nell came and sat across from him, folding her hands the way she had been taught to fold them at meals, patient and ready. Vera came through from the back with a plate of bread and cheese and set it between them without a word. She sat down in the third chair and folded her arms. "Hale's going to move," Vera said. "He's not a man who waits. He's going to file something or send someone or both. We need a plan." Cole told them about the surveyor, Elijah Croft. If Croft signed a false affidavit for the prior claim, he signed false documents. That's a crime. If I can get him to admit it or find evidence that Briggs paid him, it breaks the whole pattern open. "How do you find him?" Vera asked. "He's in Cheyenne. That's 3 days' hard ride. If I leave at dawn, I can be there in 2.5. "You're leaving?" Nell's voice was flat, controlled, but the edge of something was underneath it. "I have to. This is the thread that unravels the whole thing. Take me with you." "I can't. It's too far, too fast, and I need to move light." "Then I'll stay with Vera." "You'll stay with Vera." Nell was quiet for a moment. She looked at the bread and cheese without seeing it. Then she looked up at Cole. "How long?" 5 days, maybe 6. "That's too long." "It's what we've got." She pressed her lips together. Then she stood up from the table, walked around to where he sat, and put her arms around his neck. She held on tight, the way she had not held on since the afternoon at the grave, when she had put her hand in his for the first time. "You come back," she said into his shoulder. "I will." "You promise." I promise." She held on for another moment. Then she let go and stepped back and wiped her face with the back of her hand, and sat down and picked up a piece of bread and took a bite. The conversation was over. Cole left before first light. He did not wake Nell. He stood in the doorway of the back room for a long moment, watching her sleep in the gray half-dark, the locket rising and falling with her breath, her hand loose and open on the pillow beside her face. He had not let himself feel the weight of this, the leaving, the risk, the chance that something could go wrong and he would not come back and she would be alone again. He had kept that weight at a distance because he needed to move, and moving required a kind of blindness to the consequences. But in the quiet of the early morning, with her small shape in the bed and the smell of lavender around him, the weight came through, and he stood in it and let it settle. Then he turned and walked out. Vera was at the counter, already dressed, a cup of coffee in her hand and a folded piece of paper on the wood. "Roads are dry," she said. "You'll make good time. I sent a telegraph to a contact in Cheyenne who knows the surveyor's office. He'll meet you at the depot when you arrive." "You have a contact in Cheyenne?" "I have contacts everywhere. It's the benefit of running the post office and never throwing anything away." She pushed the paper across. "His name is Will Barlow. He runs a freight company. He's honest, which is rare, and he owes me a favor from 1874 that he's been trying to repay ever since." Cole took the paper. He tucked it inside his coat. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Bring me back something that puts Clement Hale in a cell." "I'll do my best." "Do better than your best. That little girl deserves better than best." Cole nodded. He walked out to Cinder and swung up into the saddle. The sky was just starting to lighten in the east, a thin line of pale yellow between the mountains and the dark. He pointed Cinder south toward Cheyenne and did not look back. The ride was long and empty. The country opened up and stayed open, rolling grassland that went on until it met the sky, with nothing to break it but an occasional dry wash or a cluster of cottonwoods along a creek bed that had not seen water since spring. Cole kept his pace steady, conserving the horse, reading the ground, watching for riders that did not appear. He had expected Hale to try something on the road. The fact that nothing happened meant either Hale did not know he had left, unlikely, or Hale was waiting for something else. Cole did not like the second option. He made camp that night in a hollow between two rises where the wind could not find him. He built no fire. He sat in the dark with a piece of cold bread and his rifle across his knees and watched the stars wheel overhead, the way they had wheeled over every camp he had made in the past 3 years. But this camp was different. This time, he had a reason to go back. This time, there was a child in a bed in Denton Fork who was waiting for him to come through a door. He had not had that in 3 years. He had forgotten what it felt like. It felt like a rope tied around his chest, pulling him forward, keeping him from drifting. He fell asleep with his back against a rock and his hand on the rifle, and he dreamed of nothing, which was a mercy. He reached Cheyenne in the middle of the second day. The town was bigger than Denton Fork, 2 main streets, a railroad depot, a courthouse with a real stone foundation, and the particular energy of a place that had decided it was going to be important and was working hard to prove it. Cole found Will Barlow at the freight office near the depot, a man in his 50s with a face that had been shaped by decades of hard weather and honest dealing. Barlow read Vera's note, then looked at Cole with the directness of someone who had learned to size up men quickly. "Elijah Croft," Barlow said, "surveyor, office on 2nd Street. He's been in business about 5 years, does good work, as far as anyone knows, but 6 months ago he paid off a note on his office 2 years early, and a month after that he bought a new buggy. Those are not things a surveyor of his size normally does on his income." "You think Briggs paid him?" "I think something changed in Croft's finances around the time the prior claim was surveyed. I don't have proof, but I know where to look." Barlow led him to a small office building on 2nd Street. The sign above the door read, "Croft Surveying, Land Boundaries and Legal Descriptions." Cole went in alone. Elijah Croft was a nervous man. That was the first thing Cole noticed. The way his eyes moved too fast. The way his hands found things to adjust on his desk that did not need adjusting. He looked up when Cole entered, and something in his face tightened. "Can I help you?" I'm here about a survey you did for the Pryor homestead earlier this year. Bitter Creek tributary. Croft's hands stopped moving. I don't discuss client work without authorization. The client was Warren Briggs, and the survey you produced was false. Croft went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you signed an affidavit that you knew was incorrect, and I think you were paid for it. And I think if I dig deep enough, I'll find the payment trail. Croft stood up. I think you should leave. I think you should tell me the truth, because the truth is the only thing that's going to keep you out of prison when this comes apart, and it is going to come apart. Warren Briggs is not going to protect you. He's going to let you take the fall. Croft's face was doing something complicated. Fear and anger and calculation all trying to occupy the same space. You don't know what you're dealing with, he said. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with a man who burns homesteads and kills families to get water rights. And I'm dealing with you, who helped him do it with a piece of paper. Croft sat back down. His hands were shaking. I didn't know about the deaths, he said. I didn't know until after. When the Pryor settlement went through, I heard rumors. But by then it was too late. I'd taken the money. I'd signed. I couldn't go back. You can go back now. You can tell the truth. And what happens to me? That depends on how fast you tell it and how much you know. Croft looked at him with the desperation of a man who had been carrying a secret that was slowly crushing him and had just been offered a way to put it down. There's more, he said. Briggs didn't just use me for the Pryor claim. He used me for all three. The Alderman place, the Pryor place, and the Cade place. I falsified boundary surveys for each one. I have the originals in my safe. The real surveys. They prove the claims were valid. Cole felt something settle in his chest. I need those originals. They're in my office safe. I can get them for you. Get them now. Croft opened the safe with hands that were still trembling. He pulled out a leather folder and handed it to Cole. Inside were 3 survey documents, each one marked with the real boundaries, each one contradicting the falsified versions that had been filed with the court. Cole read them slowly, one at a time, and felt the weight of what they meant. This was the proof. This was the thread that unraveled everything. He looked at Croft. You're going to write a statement. Full account, names, dates, amounts, and you're going to sign it. Croft nodded. And then what? Then you come back to Denton Fork with me and tell a judge. Croft's face went pale again. I can't. Briggs will be in custody before the week is out. The federal investigation is already opened. You're not protecting yourself by hiding. You're protecting him. Croft sat down and put his head in his hands. Then he looked up. All right, I'll write the statement. I'll come. Cole left the office an hour later with the leather folder inside his coat and Croft's signed statement folded next to it. He had the proof. He had the thread. He walked back toward the depot through the Cheyenne evening, and for the first time in 4 days, he let himself feel something close to hope. It was a fragile thing, unfamiliar and sharp-edged, but it was there. He had something to take back to Denton Fork. He had something to take back to Nell. He sent a telegraph to Vera from the depot. Found what we need, coming home. Keep her safe. Then he bought supplies for the ride back and went to the livery to check on Cinder. He would leave at dawn. He would push hard. He would be back in Denton Fork in 2.5 days, and then they would have everything they needed to end this. But as he lay down in the hayloft that night, with the leather folder pressed against his chest and the sound of the town settling around him, he felt the weight of something else. The weight of a man who had been running for 3 years and had finally stopped. The weight of a child who was waiting. The weight of a promise he had made and intended to keep. He fell asleep with his hand on the folder and the locket chain around his neck, the one Nell had given him to hold. And he dreamed of her standing in a garden that had not been planted yet. The livery was still dark when Cole saddled Cinder. The air smelled of hay and horse, and the particular stillness that came before the world remembered how to move. He worked by feel, cinching the girth, checking the hooves, running his hand down the mare's neck to feel for what she was not saying. She was tired. So was he. But the leather folder was inside his coat, and the locket was around his neck, and there was a 5-year-old girl in a blue dress waiting for him in Denton Fork. That was enough. He led Cinder out into the Cheyenne dawn. The sky was doing that thing it did on the high plains, pale gray in the east, fading to deep indigo overhead, with the last stars still holding on like they were not ready to give up the night. Cole swung into the saddle and pointed north. He had 2 days of hard riding ahead, and he intended to make it in 1.5. The road out of Cheyenne was busy for the first few miles. Freight wagons, a stagecoach, a man driving a herd of 20 cattle toward the stockyards. Cole kept his head down and his eyes moving. He did not expect trouble this close to town, but he also had not expected to make it this far without trouble, and he was not about to start assuming the world would stay kind. The road thinned after the first hour. The freight wagons turned off toward a siding. The stagecoach pulled ahead and disappeared over a rise, and Cole found himself alone on a stretch of open ground that offered nothing but grass and sky and the long, flat line of the horizon. He pushed Cinder into a steady lope, covering ground the way a man covered ground when he had somewhere to be and people counting on him to get there. The morning warmed. The wind picked up from the southwest, carrying the smell of dry grass and dust. Cole let his mind drift the way it drifted when the riding was easy and the country was empty. Not to any particular place, but to the edges of things, to the shape of what he was carrying and what it meant. He thought about Nell writing her name at the top of that first page, the ink slightly smudged where her hand had rested, the letters careful and deliberate, the work of a child who had been taught that her name mattered. He thought about the way she had stood on the post office porch that first morning, boots already on, watching the street like someone who had already learned that safety was something you had to keep earning. He thought about the way she had held his hand at the grave, small fingers around 2 of his, trusting him before he had earned that trust. He thought about the locket around his neck, the weight of it against his chest, the words, "Stay close," engraved in silver that had been worn smooth by years of being held. He had not taken it off since she gave it to him. He did not plan to take it off until he put it back in her hands. He was so deep in the thought that he almost missed the dust on the road behind him. Almost. He caught it at the corner of his eye, a thin plume, too low and too steady to be a dust devil. Riders. 2 of them. Moving at the same pace he was moving, which meant they were either heading the same direction for the same reason, or they were following him. Cole did not believe in coincidences. He had stopped believing in them the day he found Nell by the well. He pulled Cinder off the road and into a dry wash that ran parallel to the track, using the low ground to break the line of sight. He rode hard for a 1/4 mile, then pulled up behind a stand of cottonwoods and waited. The riders topped the rise where he had left the road. They slowed. One of them stood in his stirrups and scanned the country ahead. Then they turned and followed the wash. Cole felt the cold settle into his chest, the familiar cold that came before violence, the cold that had kept him alive in other times and other places. He checked his rifle. He checked his pistol. He waited. The riders came on at a cautious pace, reading the ground. They were not amateurs. They stayed spread, one on each side of the wash, keeping their eyes moving. Cole recognized the type, men who had done this before, men who were paid to finish what they started. He had 2 choices. He could try to outrun them, pushing Cinder across open country and hoping the mare had more bottom than their horses. Or he could turn and meet them, use the terrain to his advantage, and end this here. He chose the second option because he was tired of running and because the leather folder inside his coat was too important to risk on a chase. He tied Cinder to a low branch, making sure the knot would hold but could be freed with one pull. Then he moved on foot up the side of the wash, using the cover of the cottonwoods and the tall grass that grew along the bank. He found a spot where the wash narrowed, where the riders would have to pass single file. He knelt and waited. They came into view a minute later. The first rider was a big man with a beard and a shotgun across his saddle. The second was leaner, younger, with a pistol on his hip and his eyes scanning the banks. They were talking low, too low for Cole to hear the words. But he caught the tone, the casual confidence of men who had done this before and expected to do it again. Cole let the first rider pass his position. He let the second rider come even with him. Then he stood up and said, "That's far enough." Both men reined in hard. The big man's hand went for the shotgun. Cole had his rifle up and leveled before the hand touched the stock. "I wouldn't," Cole said. The big man stopped. The younger man's hand was still on his pistol, but he had not drawn. They were measuring him, the way men measured when they were deciding whether the risk was worth the reward. "We're just riding," the big man said. "You've been riding my back trail since Cheyenne. That's a big country. Lots of people ride the same road. Most people don't follow when the road turns into a wash." The big man looked at the younger man. Something passed between them, a decision, silent and quick. The younger man's hand moved. Cole fired. The shot went wide on purpose, kicking up dirt between the two horses. Both animals shied, and the younger man's pistol came out, but the shot had done its work. It had bought a second, and in a fight, a second was everything. Cole levered another round into the chamber. "Next one goes through the man who keeps reaching. I don't want to kill you. I want you to ride back to Cheyenne and tell whoever sent you that the job is not going to get done. Tell them Cole Hargrove is going to Denton Fork, and he's bringing evidence that's going to put Warren Briggs in prison. And if they send anyone else, I'll send them back in a box." The big man looked at him for a long moment. Then he slowly lifted his hands away from the shotgun. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I've been making mistakes for 3 years. This isn't one of them." He kept the rifle on them while they turned their horses. He watched them ride back the way they had come, not hurrying, not looking back, the way men rode when they had been told something they needed to think about. Cole waited until they were out of sight. Then he let out a long breath and lowered the rifle. His hands were steady. They always were in the moment. It was after that the shaking started, and he did not have time for after right now. He went back to Cinder, freed the knot, and swung up. He pushed the mare hard for the rest of the day, not giving the riders a chance to change their minds or call for reinforcements. The country opened and closed around him, ridges and draws, long flats of bunch grass, the occasional cluster of cattle that lifted their heads to watch him pass. He did not stop until the sun was low and Cinder was blowing hard. He found a camp in a grove of cottonwoods along a creek that still had a trickle of water. He unsaddled and rubbed the mare down and let her drink. Then he sat with his back against a tree and ate a piece of jerky and thought about what had happened. Hale had sent men. That meant Hale knew he had left town. That meant Hale knew he had gone to Cheyenne. That meant Hale knew something about what he had found, or at least suspected enough to try to stop him from bringing it back. Cole touched the leather folder inside his coat. He had the proof. But proof did not matter if he did not live to deliver it. He slept poorly that night, waking at every sound, the snap of a twig, the cry of a night bird, the wind moving through the cottonwood leaves. Each time, his hand found the rifle. Each time, the dark was empty. He rode out before first light, pushing through the gray dawn with the same steady urgency. The country began to look familiar toward midday, the shape of a butte he recognized, the twist of a creek bed he had crossed on the way out. He was close. He was 2 hours out from Denton Fork when he saw the dust on the road ahead. One rider, coming fast. Cole pulled up and waited, his hand on the rifle. The rider resolved into a woman's shape, gray hair, straight back, a horse that knew its business. Vera. She reined in hard, and the mare danced sideways before settling. Vera's face was tight with something Cole had not seen on her before. It took him a moment to name it. Fear. "They took her," Vera said. Cole's world stopped. The words did not make sense. They could not make sense. "Who?" "Hale. He came this morning with a deputy and a paper. A court order from Casper, signed by a judge Cole had never heard of, transferring Nell to the temporary custody of Warren Briggs, pending the full hearing." "That's not possible. Haynes denied the petition." "This wasn't Haynes. This was a different judge. Briggs has judges in his pocket all over the territory. Haynes is clean, but Haynes isn't the only one with a gavel. The paper looked real. The deputy enforced it." "They took her an hour ago." Cole's hands were shaking. He did not try to stop them. "Which way?" "South, toward Briggs's ranch. It's a half-day ride." Cole turned Cinder without another word. He did not look back at Vera. He did not say goodbye. He put his heels to the mare and rode. The country blurred past. He did not feel the saddle or the wind or the miles. He felt only the locket against his chest and the leather folder inside his coat and the shape of a 5-year-old girl being taken away from him by men with papers and guns. He had promised her. He had promised her he would come back. He had promised her he would not let anyone take her. And he had broken that promise without even knowing he was breaking it, because he had been 100 miles away, chasing a thread that had led him straight into a trap. He had underestimated Hale. He had underestimated how fast a man with money and connections could move when the legal path was blocked. Hale had not tried to stop the hearing. Hale had simply found a way to bypass it, and now Nell was in a wagon or on a horse, being taken to a man who had already killed her family. Cole leaned forward and asked Cinder for more. The mare gave it. She had never once failed him, and she was not going to fail him now. An hour into the ride, he saw the dust, a small cloud, moving south in the distance. He pushed harder. The dust grew closer. He began to make out the shape of a buggy, 2 horses, and a rider alongside it. The rider saw him at the same moment and pulled up, turning to face him. Cole recognized the set of the shoulders. Clement Hale. He was riding alone, which meant the deputy had already gone ahead with the buggy, or Hale had sent him ahead to deliver Nell while Hale stayed behind to deal with Cole. Cole did not slow. He rode straight at Hale, and Hale sat his horse with that same patient stillness, waiting. Cole pulled up 10 feet out. The buggy was still moving south, growing smaller. He could not see if Nell was inside it. "She's not in the buggy," Hale said. "She's already at the ranch. I sent her ahead with the deputy. By the time you get there, she'll be inside. By the time you get past the men I have stationed there, the adoption will be filed in a different jurisdiction, and you'll have no standing to challenge it. You lost, Hargrove. You were outmaneuvered." Cole looked at Hale. The locket was warm against his chest. The leather folder was heavy inside his coat, and for one long moment he felt the full weight of everything he had failed to protect: Sarah, Henry, and now Nell. It pressed down on him like a physical thing, like the roof of a burning house collapsing. But then something else rose up underneath it. Something that had been buried for 3 years, underneath the grief and the running and the deliberate emptiness. It was not hope. It was not even anger. It was something older and more fundamental. It was the refusal to stop. "You're wrong," Cole said. Hale tilted his head. "Am I? You think you've won because you got her first. But you forgot something." "What's that?" "She's not afraid of you. She's been not afraid of you since the day I found her. She stood in front of a judge and asked for what she wanted. She wrote letters and signed her name. She's already braver than you'll ever be. And she knows I'm coming. You took her away from me, but you did not make her stop believing that I would come. That's the difference between us, Hale. She believes in me. Nobody has ever believed in you." Hale's face did not change. But something behind his eyes shifted, a crack, small and deep. Cole did not wait for a response. He turned Cinder and rode south, toward the buggy, toward the ranch, toward the 5-year-old girl who was waiting for him. And he did not look back. The miles passed like a wound that would not stop bleeding. Cole rode with his head down and his mind fixed on a single point: the shape of a buggy growing smaller on the horizon, the dust settling behind it, the certainty that every second he lost was a second Nell spent in a place she did not belong. Cinder responded to the urgency in his legs, the shift of his weight, the wordless communication between a man and a horse that had been through enough together that language had become optional. She stretched into a long, ground-eating lope, and Cole let her set the pace because she knew her limits better than he knew his own, and he trusted her the way he trusted very little else in this world. The country changed as he rode south. The flat grasslands gave way to rolling hills, cut by shallow ravines and studded with stands of juniper and sage. The soil turned redder, the rocks sharper, and the air carried a taste of iron that Cole did not like. He had been on enough battlefields to recognize when the ground itself felt like a warning. He pushed through it. The buggy tracks were easy to follow, 2 parallel lines cutting through the dust, with the deeper impressions of the horse's hooves beside them. He followed them like a man following a lifeline, afraid to look away, afraid that if he blinked they would disappear and he would lose the only thread he had left. The sun climbed, and the heat came with it, pressing down on the back of his neck, baking the moisture out of the air until his lips cracked and his throat felt lined with sand. He drank from his canteen in small sips, forcing himself to ration, forcing himself to think past the single burning need to find her. Thinking was necessary. Thinking was what would keep him alive long enough to get her out. He had no plan beyond reaching the ranch. He had no backup, no authority, no piece of paper that would make anyone stop and listen. He had a leather folder full of evidence, a locket around his neck, and a promise he intended to keep. It was not much. But it was all he had, and he was going to spend it completely. The tracks led him to a rise, and beyond that rise, the Briggs Ranch came into view. It was not what he had expected. He had pictured something ostentatious, a mansion on the prairie, a monument to the kind of wealth that came from taking what belonged to other people. What he saw was different. The main house was large but plain, built of native stone and dark timber, with a broad porch that ran the length of the front. The barns and outbuildings were well maintained but unadorned. The corrals held good horses, the kind that cost money and were worth it. The whole place had the feel of something built by a man who cared about function, not appearance. A man who thought about the long game, who invested in things that would last. That made Briggs more dangerous, not less. A man who lived for show was a man who could be distracted. A man who built for permanence was a man who planned for every contingency. Cole pulled up behind a stand of junipers at the edge of the property and studied the layout. 2 men on the porch, both armed. 1 more at the barn, leaning against the doorframe with a rifle cradled in his arms. A 4th man walking the perimeter along the south fence. That was the visible security. There would be more inside. Briggs was not a fool, and Hale would have warned him that Cole was coming. Cole dismounted and tied Cinder to a low branch, well back from the edge of the trees. He checked his rifle, his pistol, the knife in his boot. Then he settled in to wait, not because he was patient, because charging in would get him killed, and getting him killed would not save Nell. He needed to understand the rhythm of the place, when the guards changed, where they looked, where they did not look. He needed a gap, and he needed to find it before the sun went down, because once dark came, the advantage would shift to the men who knew the ground. He watched for an hour. The guards were professional but not exceptional. They followed a pattern, predictable in their rounds, casual in their attention. The man on the porch on the left side had a habit of looking out toward the road every few minutes, but he never looked behind him at the door. The man on the right side spent more time watching the barn than the yard. The perimeter walker stayed close to the fence line, never venturing more than a few yards from it. The man at the barn door had not moved in 40 minutes. He was either very disciplined or half asleep, and Cole was betting on the latter. He made his decision. He moved. He circled wide to the east, using the cover of the junipers and the rolling ground to stay below the line of sight. The grass was dry and tall enough to hide a crouching man, and he moved through it the way he had moved through country in other years, in other places, when moving quietly was the difference between coming home and not coming home. He reached the south fence where the perimeter walker had just passed. He had maybe 5 minutes before the man came back. Cole went over the fence in a low, fluid motion, landing on the balls of his feet and freezing, listening. Nothing. He moved toward the barn, keeping the structure between himself and the main house. The barn door was still open, and the man leaning against it had not moved. Cole circled to the back of the barn, found a loose board near the ground, and worked it free. The gap was just wide enough for him to squeeze through. He pulled himself inside and stood in the dim light, breathing in the smell of hay and leather and horses. The barn was mostly empty, a few horses in stalls, a stack of hay bales, some tack hanging on the wall. No sign of Nell. He had not expected her to be here. She would be in the main house, probably in a room with a locked door and a guard outside. But the barn was a place to start, a place to gather information, to find something he could use. He moved to the front of the barn and peered through a crack in the boards. The man at the door was still there, his back to the barn, his rifle cradled loosely. Cole could take him quietly. But that would raise the alarm the moment someone noticed he was missing. He needed a different approach. He needed to get into the house without anyone knowing he was there. He found what he needed in a small tack room at the back of the barn, a set of oilskin coat and a hat that were similar enough to what the guards wore to pass at a distance, especially in the fading light. He shrugged into the coat, pulled the hat low, and picked up a pitchfork that was leaning against the wall. Not a weapon that would fool anyone up close, but from a distance, in the dimming afternoon, it would look like he belonged. He walked out of the barn with the pitchfork over his shoulder, keeping his head down, moving with the casual gait of a man who had every right to be there. The guard at the door glanced at him and looked away. The men on the porch did not even turn. Cole walked past the corner of the barn and angled toward the back of the main house. His heart was beating hard, but his hands were steady. He had done this before. He had walked into places where he was not welcome, wearing clothes that were not his, carrying a lie that could unravel at any moment. It was a skill he had hoped never to use again, but here he was. The back of the house had a door that led into what looked like a kitchen. A window beside it showed a dim light inside. Cole stepped up to the door and tried the handle. Locked. He had expected that. He moved to the window and looked in. The kitchen was empty. A lamp was burning low on the counter, and a pot of something was simmering on the stove. The window was latched from the inside, but the latch was old and the frame was warped. Cole worked the blade of his knife into the gap between the window and the frame and gently pried. The latch gave with a soft click. He eased the window open, lifted himself over the sill, and dropped into the kitchen. He stood still for a moment, listening. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt held, like the building itself was waiting for something. He moved through the kitchen into a narrow hallway. To his left, a door leading to what looked like a dining room. To his right, a staircase going up. He could hear voices from somewhere on the second floor, low, indistinct, but carrying the shape of conversation. He took the stairs one at a time, keeping to the edges where the boards were less likely to creak. The voices grew clearer as he climbed. A man's voice, calm and measured, and then a child's voice, answering, Nell. He could not make out the words, but he recognized the cadence, the careful, deliberate way she built her sentences, one word at a time, making sure each one was the right one. She was not crying. She was not begging. She was talking, the way she talked when she was working through something, laying out the pieces the way she had laid them out on Vera's counter. She was buying time. She was waiting for him to come. Cole reached the top of the stairs. The hallway stretched ahead of him, with doors on either side. The voices were coming from the room at the end, to the left. The door was closed. A sliver of light showed underneath. He moved toward it, keeping his steps light, his breathing shallow. He pressed his ear to the wood. "You have to understand," the man was saying. It was not Hale's voice. It was deeper, older, carrying the particular weight of a man who was used to being listened to. Warren Briggs. "Your father and I had a disagreement about the land. That's all it was. A business disagreement that got out of hand. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. You sent men to our house." Nell's voice was flat, the same flatness she had used at the grave, the flatness that came when she had moved beyond fear into something else. "I sent men to talk to your father. I did not tell them to hurt anyone. They hurt my father. They hurt my mother. That was not, 'You're lying.'" The words were quiet and absolute. "You're lying, and you think because I'm 5 I won't know, but I know. Papers can be bought, but my papa's letter is true, and Cole is coming with it." Cole felt the words go through him like a current. He put his hand on the door handle, turned it. The door was not locked. He pushed it open. The room was a study, lined with bookshelves and heavy furniture. Warren Briggs stood near the window, his back to the door, his hands clasped behind him. Nell sat on a settee near the fireplace, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, the locket gone from her neck. She looked up when the door opened, and her face did not change. But something in her eyes moved, a light that had been banked, suddenly flaring. Briggs turned. He was older than Cole had expected, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, with a face that had been shaped by decades of getting what he wanted. He looked at Cole without surprise. "Mr. Hargrove, I was wondering when you would arrive. I'm here now." "So you are." Briggs' voice was calm, almost conversational. "I have to admire your persistence. Most men would have turned back by now. Most men would have understood that the situation was beyond their ability to influence. I'm not most men. No, you're the man who found the Cade girl, who buried her mother, who rode to Cheyenne and found Elijah Croft and convinced him to turn against his employer. Briggs smiled, a thin, cold thing. "I have people everywhere, Mr. Hargrove. I knew about Croft before you left Cheyenne. I knew about the documents you retrieved. I knew you were coming." Cole's hand tightened on the rifle. "Then you know what I've got." "I do. And I also know that even if you had those documents, they wouldn't do you any good tonight. Because tonight, you're in my house, and the law is 3 hours away. By the time you could get anyone to listen, this situation will have resolved itself one way or another. You threaten me and I'll put a bullet in you before you finish the sentence." "You won't." Briggs's voice was still calm. "Because if you do, there are 4 armed men in this house who will hear the shot and be through that door in seconds. And even if you managed to get past them, you'd be a fugitive. You'd never see this child again." Cole stood in the doorway. The rifle was in his hands. The locket was against his chest. Nell was watching him with those gray eyes that were not asking him to do anything. She was just watching, trusting him to decide. And in that moment, he understood that he had been outmaneuvered again. Not because Briggs was smarter than him, but because Briggs did not care about the rules. Briggs would burn down the whole system rather than lose, and Cole did not have the firepower to match that kind of ruthlessness. But he had something else. He had the thing that Briggs had never learned to value. He had time, and he had patience, and he had a 5-year-old girl who believed in him. And that belief, that quiet, unshakable faith, was a weapon that Briggs could not buy, no matter how much money he had. "You're right," Cole said. "I can't take her out of here tonight. Not with 4 men standing between me and the door. But I can stay. I can stand right here in this room with both of you until the sun comes up. And when the sun comes up, I will walk out of this house with Nell Cade, because I have the law on my side. I have the paper in my coat that proves your surveyor lied. I have the letter her father wrote. And I have a federal investigation that is already moving. You can delay me tonight, but you cannot stop me." Briggs looked at him for a long moment. The smile was gone. Something else was in its place, a calculation, cold and precise. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I've heard that before." Cole stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He did not sit down. He stood with his back to the wall, the rifle in his hands, his eyes on Briggs. Nell did not move from the settee, but she looked at him, and she nodded once, the same nod she had given him at the grave, the one that meant she understood. And they waited. The clock on the mantel ticked like a heartbeat measured in iron. Cole stood with his back to the wall beside the door, the rifle cradled in his arms, his eyes moving between Briggs and the window, between the window and the door, between the door and Nell. The lamplight cast long shadows across the study, pooling in the corners, making the bookshelves look like the walls of a cave. Nell had not moved from the settee. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her chin level. She looked small in the heavy furniture, a doll placed on a throne too large for her. But there was nothing small about the way she held herself. She was watching Briggs with the same steady gray eyes she had used on Judge Haynes, on Clement Hale, on every person who had tried to take something from her. She was not afraid. She was waiting. Cole admired that more than he could say. Briggs had not moved either. He stood near the window, one hand resting on the sill, his face half in shadow. He was a man who had spent decades learning to control his expressions, and he was using every bit of that control now. But control was not the same as calm. Cole could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the slight tightening at the corner of his jaw. Briggs was not used to being defied. He was not used to having his plans interrupted by a man with a rifle and a child who would not cry. The silence stretched. The clock ticked. Nell shifted slightly on the settee, crossing her ankles the way she had been taught to sit at a table. "Mr. Briggs," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried in the stillness. Briggs turned his head to look at her. "Yes? Why didn't you just ask?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Briggs's composure flickered. "Ask what?" "For the water rights. Papa always said that most people would give you what you needed if you asked them right. He said you just had to explain why it mattered. He would have listened if you had told him why you needed the land." Briggs was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, flatter, less polished. Your father would not have listened. He was a stubborn man. He believed the land was his by right, and he would not be moved by argument or offer. He might have been moved by the truth, Nell said, but you never told him the truth. You sent men with threats, and then you sent men with fire. Briggs's hand tightened on the windowsill. You are 5 years old. You do not understand the complexities of business. I understand that my mother is dead because of your business. The words hung in the air, sharp and clean. Cole felt them land in his chest, the same way her words always landed, precise and weighted. Briggs did not answer. He turned back to the window, his silhouette framed against the dark glass. The clock ticked on. Cole let the silence hold. He had learned long ago that silence was a weapon, that most people could not stand it, that they would fill it with words they had not meant to say. He waited. Briggs did not fill it, but something in the room had shifted. The power had moved, just slightly, like a door that had been left open a crack. An hour passed, maybe 2. Cole lost track of time the way he lost track of it in a standoff, not counting minutes, but measuring the small changes. The angle of the shadows, the deepening of the dark outside the window, the way the lamplight grew thicker and more yellow as the oil burned down. Nell's eyelids drooped. She caught herself, straightened, blinked hard. Then she looked at Cole. "Can I come sit by you?" she asked. Yes. She slid off the settee and crossed the room, her bare feet silent on the rug. She sat down beside him, her shoulder touching his leg, her hands back in her lap. She did not ask for anything else. She just sat there, close enough to feel the warmth of him. Cole looked down at the top of her head, at the part in her hair where the braid had come loose, at the small hands folded neatly. He wanted to tell her that he was sorry he had not been there when they took her, sorry he had let her be brought to this place, sorry that she had to spend another night in the presence of the man who had destroyed her family. But he did not say it because he knew she did not need his apology. She needed him to stay, and he was staying. Briggs turned from the window. He looked at them, the man and the child on the floor, the rifle across the man's knees, the child's shoulder pressed against his leg. Something moved across his face, too fast to read, then gone. "You can't stay here forever," he said. "I don't need forever. I need until sunrise." "And what do you think sunrise will bring?" "The truth, the same thing it always brings." Briggs shook his head slowly. "You are a fool, Mr. Hargrove. You have a piece of paper from a frightened surveyor and a letter from a dead man. That is not a case. That is a story. Stories do not hold up in court unless someone with authority tells them. Then I'll tell it. And Nell will tell it. And Vera Hutchkins will tell it. And Franklin Pryor will tell it. And by the time we're done, there will be so many people telling the same story that even a judge in your pocket will have trouble ignoring it." Briggs's eyes narrowed. "You have more witnesses than I thought. You have more enemies than you thought." The words were out before Cole planned them. But as soon as he said them, he knew they were true. The Pryor family, the alderman widow, if she was still alive, the men who had worked for Briggs and left, the people in Denton Fork who had watched 3 families lose everything and said nothing because they were afraid. But fear had a limit, and once it was crossed, it turned into something else. Cole had seen it before. He had seen the moment when a town that had been silent for years suddenly found its voice, because one person had stood up and said enough. He was that person now, and he was not going to stop. The night deepened. The lamp sputtered and dimmed. Cole did not light another. He let the dark settle around them, because the dark was an ally. It hid his face. It hid his movements. It made the room smaller and more intimate, a space where the truth could not hide. Nell's head drooped. She fought it for a while, her chin bobbing up and down, her eyelids sinking. Then she gave in and leaned against his leg, her cheek resting on his knee, her breath evening out into the slow rhythm of sleep. Cole did not move. He did not shift his weight. He let her sleep the way he had let her sleep on the ride south from the homestead, holding himself steady so she could rest. The locket was still around his neck. He touched it with his free hand, feeling the worn silver, the engraved words he had memorized. Stay close. He thought about Ruth Cade, a woman he had never met, who had sewn a legal document into a locket, and taught her daughter to open it only when the worst happened. He thought about Daniel Cade, writing in the dark, naming the men who were coming for him, trusting that someone would find the letter and do something with it. He thought about Nell, a 5-year-old who had lost everything and had not broken. She had bent. She had bent the way a willow bends in a flood, going with the current because fighting it would have snapped her. But she had not broken, and she was here, asleep against his knee, believing that he would keep her safe. The weight of that belief pressed down on him, heavy and warm. He did not try to escape it. Dawn came slowly. The first light was a smudge of gray at the edge of the window, then a thin line of gold, then a spreading wash of pale yellow that pushed the shadows back into the corners of the room. Cole watched it come with the patience of a man who had been waiting a long time. He had made it through the night. He had kept her safe. But the hardest part was still ahead. Briggs was still standing by the window. He had not slept. His face was lined, his eyes red-rimmed, but his composure was intact. He looked at the dawn the way a man looked at an event he had been expecting and had prepared for. "Sunrise," he said. "Sunrise," Cole agreed. "You still intend to walk out of here with the child?" "I do." "And if I stop you?" "You won't." Briggs's mouth curved into something that was not a smile. "You have a great deal of confidence for a man who is outnumbered and outgunned. I have a great deal of confidence in the truth. The truth does not stop bullets. No, but it does stop juries, and it stops judges, and it stops the federal government when they start asking questions." Briggs' eyes flickered. For just a moment, the composure cracked. Cole saw it, the small break in the armor, the place where doubt had found a seam. He pressed. "You know what I have. You know it's enough to start an investigation. You know that once the investigation starts, they will dig into everything you've done for the past 10 years. And you know that there is more than just the Bitter Creek claims. There are other families, other lands, other men you have ruined. It all comes out, Briggs. It all comes out." Briggs was quiet. The morning light grew stronger, filling the room with a pale gold glow. Dust motes swam in the beams, slow and aimless. Nell stirred against Cole's leg. She lifted her head, blinking, her hair flattened on one side, her eyes heavy with sleep. She looked at Cole first, then at the window, then at Briggs. She did not say anything. She just sat up straight, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. The same way she had waited through everything, the same way she would wait through whatever came next. A knock came at the study door. Briggs turned. "Yes?" The door opened, and a man stepped in. He was tall, lean, with the weathered face of someone who had spent years in the sun. He wore a badge on his vest, and his eyes went first to Cole, then to the rifle, then to Nell, then to Briggs. "Mr. Briggs, there's a rider coming up the road. Woman. She's got a federal marshal with her." Cole felt something release in his chest. He did not let it show on his face, but he felt it. A loosening of the knot that had been tight since the moment Vera had told him Nell was taken. Vera had not waited. She had ridden through the night. She had brought the law. Briggs's face went very still. He looked at the man in the doorway, then at Cole, then at the window. The calculation was running behind his eyes, faster now, running through options that were narrowing with every second. "How far out?" 10 minutes, maybe less." Briggs nodded. He looked at Cole. His eyes were cold, but something underneath them had changed. A recognition, perhaps. The recognition that he had been outmaneuvered not by a faster horse or a bigger gun, but by something he had never learned to value. "You win this round, Mr. Hargrove," he said, "but this is not the end. It's the end of your hold on her. That's all that matters to me." Nell stood up. She walked over to Cole and took his hand, the way she had taken it at the grave, the way she had taken it every time she needed to remember that she was not alone. She held it with both of hers, small fingers wrapped around his, and looked up at Briggs. "You're not my family," she said. "You never were, and you never will be." Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked to the window, his back to the room, his hands clasped behind him. He did not say another word. The front door opened below. Voices drifted up, Vera's, clear and sharp, and a man's, deeper, official. Footsteps on the stairs. Cole did not move from the wall. Nell did not let go of his hand. The study door opened again, and Vera Hutchkins walked in with a man in a marshal's coat behind her. She looked at Cole, she looked at Nell, and something in her face relaxed, the tightness that had been there since the previous morning finally letting go. "You made it," she said. "We made it." Vera crossed the room and knelt in front of Nell. She put her hands on Nell's shoulders and looked at her directly. "You all right, honey?" "Yes, ma'am." "Did they hurt you?" "No, ma'am, they just talked." Vera's jaw tightened. She stood up and turned to the marshal. "This is the child, Nell Cade, and this is Cole Hargrove, her temporary guardian. The man by the window is Warren Briggs." The marshal looked at each of them in turn. He was a compact man with a graying beard and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that rushing led to mistakes. "I've been assigned to the federal investigation into the Bitter Creek land acquisitions," he said. "I've read the preliminary file. I've read the statement from Elijah Croft." He looked at Briggs. "Mr. Briggs, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and the unlawful acquisition of property through coercion and violence." Briggs did not turn from the window. "I expected this," he said. "Not today, perhaps." But eventually, he turned. His face was composed, the mask back in place. "I will cooperate fully with the investigation. My lawyers will be in contact with your office." The marshal nodded. "You'll be remanded to federal custody pending the hearing. You have the right to counsel, and you have the right to remain silent." "I know my rights, Marshal." "Then I suggest you exercise them." The marshal took Briggs by the arm and led him out of the room. Briggs did not resist. He walked out without looking back, his step steady, his shoulders straight. He was still a man who believed he could control the outcome, even as the door closed behind him. The room fell quiet. Vera let out a long breath. She looked at Cole. "You look terrible." "I feel terrible." "Good. That means you're alive." She looked at Nell. "You, on the other hand, look like you need a bath and about 12 hours of sleep. In that order." Nell almost smiled. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. "Yes, ma'am." "Then let's go home." They walked out of the Briggs ranch together, Cole, Nell, and Vera, into the morning light that was now full and golden, burning off the last of the night's chill. The yard was empty. The guards were gone, scattered by the arrival of the marshal. The horses in the corral watched them pass with mild curiosity. Nell still held Cole's hand. She had not let go since she took it in the study. He did not pull away. They reached the road where Vera had left her horse and the marshal's horse. Vera had also brought Cinder, tied to the back of her saddle. The mare nickered when she saw Cole, and he put his hand on her neck and felt the warmth of her, the familiar solidity. "Let's go home," he said. Nell looked up at him. "Home," she said. And for the first time in 3 days, the word sounded like a place that existed. The ride back to Denton Fork was quiet in a way that felt different from the silence of the night before. That silence had been sharp and watchful, the silence of prey holding still in the presence of a predator. This silence was softer, the silence of a wound beginning to close. Cole rode with Nell in front of him, the same way he had ridden from the homestead, her back against his chest, her hands loose in her lap. She had not asked for the locket back yet. He could feel it against his own chest, the chain warm from his skin, the small weight of the silver pendant resting above his heart. He would give it back when she asked. He would not offer it before then because she had given it to him for a reason, and he respected that reason. The country opened around them as they rode north. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning mist, revealing the long grass and the distant mountains and the sky that went on forever. The world was still the same world, but it felt different. It felt like a place where things could grow. Vera rode ahead, her back straight, her gray hair coming loose from its bun. She had not said much since they left the ranch. She did not need to. The fact that she had ridden through the night, found a federal marshal, and brought him back in time was a statement that needed no elaboration. Cole watched her and thought about the kind of woman she was, the kind who had spent 60 years building a web of connections and obligations, not for power, but for the simple reason that you never knew when you would need to pull a thread to save a child. She had pulled that thread last night, and it had held. They reached Denton Fork in the early afternoon. The town was quiet, but not the quiet of indifference. People were on their porches, in their doorways, watching them pass. The word had spread, the way words spread in small towns, carried by telegraph and gossip, and the particular current that moved through a community when something important had happened. Cole saw Franklin Pryor standing on the hardware store porch. Pryor lifted his hand, not a wave, just a gesture of acknowledgement. Cole nodded back. The Pryor family knew. They knew what had happened at the ranch, and they knew what it meant for them too. The pattern was broken. The thread had been pulled, and the whole thing was unraveling. Vera pulled up in front of the post office. She dismounted stiffly, the way a woman dismounted after a long ride and too little sleep. She looked at Cole, then at Nell. "There's water on the stove. I left it warming before I rode out. And there's bread in the box. You two get inside. I'll take care of the horses." Cole started to protest, but Vera cut him off with a look. "You've been standing guard all night with a rifle in your hands and a child on your knee. You're not going to argue with me about who unsaddles the horses. Get inside." Cole got inside. He helped Nell down from Cinder and carried her across the boardwalk because her legs were unsteady and she was swaying with exhaustion. She did not protest. She put her arms around his neck and rested her head on his shoulder, and he carried her through the door and into the back room where the same bed waited, the same lavender-smelling quilt, the same narrow iron frame. He set her down gently. She lay back against the pillow and looked up at him with those gray eyes that were half closed, fighting sleep. "You still have my locket," she said. "I do." "Keep it a little longer." She closed her eyes. She was asleep before he could answer. Cole stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. The rise and fall of the quilt. The small hand curled beside her face. The way the afternoon light fell across her cheek, soft and golden. He had not let himself feel the full weight of the past 24 hours. He had kept it at a distance, the way he kept everything at a distance when he needed to function. But now, standing in the quiet of Vera's back room, with the child safe and the threat contained, the weight came down on him all at once. He sat down in the chair by the window and put his head in his hands. He did not cry. He had not cried in 3 years, and he was not going to start now. But he shook. His hands shook, and his shoulders shook, and he sat there in the afternoon light and let the shaking run its course. When it stopped, he felt lighter, not healed, but lighter. Vera came in an hour later. She found him still sitting in the chair watching Nell sleep. She did not say anything. She put a cup of coffee in his hand and sat down in the other chair, the one by the door, and drank her own coffee in silence. After a while she said, "You're going to adopt her." It was not a question. "Yes." "Then you need to start the paperwork. Greer can handle it from here. But you need to go to Casper. File the formal petition. Get the judge to sign it." "I know. And you need to deal with Hale." Cole looked at her. "What about Hale?" "He wasn't at the ranch when the marshal arrived." I asked. "He left last night before the marshal got there." "He's still out there, and he's not the kind of man who accepts a loss quietly." Cole had known this. He had pushed it to the back of his mind because he had needed to focus on getting Nell out. But Vera was right. Hale was still free. And a man like Clement Hale did not disappear when his employer fell. He adapted. He found a new angle. He waited. Cole drank his coffee and thought about Hale. The man's stillness, his patience, the way he watched and waited and never seemed to hurry. He was not a man who acted on impulse. He was a man who planned, who calculated, who moved only when the move was certain to produce the outcome he wanted. That made him more dangerous than Briggs. Briggs was predictable. Briggs operated through the system, through money and influence and the weight of his position. Hale operated through shadows, and shadows could go anywhere. "I'll find him," Cole said. "Not today. Today I rest, but I will find him." Vera nodded. She did not ask how. She trusted him to figure it out. The next 3 days passed in a slow, careful rhythm. Nell slept through the first day and most of the second. She woke in the evenings, ate a little, said a few words, and went back to sleep. The exhaustion had been deeper than anyone had realized. She had been running on nothing but will for days, and now that the emergency was over, her body was demanding payment. Cole let her sleep. He sat by the window and watched the street and waited. He wrote a long letter to Franklin Greer, detailing everything that had happened: the arrest of Briggs, the statement from Croft, the need to move forward with the adoption. He sent it by telegraph, the most expensive telegram he had ever sent, and he did not regret a single word of it. Greer replied the same day. Petition prepared. Court date set for next week. Come to Casper with the child. Bring the evidence. Cole read the telegram twice. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket next to the locket. On the third day, Nell woke in the morning. She sat up in bed, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes clear. She looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Then she looked at Cole, who was sitting in the chair with a cup of coffee. "You're still here," she said. "Said I would be." She nodded. She threw off the quilt and stood up, wobbling slightly, then steadying. "I need to wash my hair." Cole almost laughed. It was the most normal thing she had said in days. Vera left a basin in the kitchen, and there's soap. She walked past him toward the kitchen, then stopped. She turned back. "Cole." "Yeah?" "Thank you for coming to get me." He looked at her. She was standing in the doorway in her bare feet, her dress wrinkled, her hair a bird's nest, looking more like a 5-year-old than she had looked in a week. "You don't have to thank me for that," he said. "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." She walked into the kitchen. Cole heard the sound of water splashing and the small sounds of a child washing her face. He sat in the chair and listened and felt something warm spread through his chest, something that had been absent for so long he had almost forgotten its shape. They left for Casper the next morning. Vera packed food, blankets, a change of clothes for Nell, and a small leather satchel containing copies of every document they had gathered: the survey maps, the Croft statement, Daniel Cade's letter, the water rights claim. She handed the satchel to Cole with the same expression she used when she handed over a piece of registered mail that required a signature. "Don't lose this." "I won't. And don't let anyone talk you out of what you're doing. You're the only father that girl has left. You make sure the judge understands that." "I will." Vera looked at Nell, who was standing by the door with her boots on and her hair braided tight, the locket back around her neck. Cole had given it back to her that morning. She had put it on without a word, but she had pressed her hand flat against it for a long moment before she let it fall against her chest. Vera knelt down and put her hands on Nell's shoulders. "You be brave," she said. "I will. And you write to me. I want to know everything." "I will." Vera stood up. She looked at them both, the man and the girl, standing in the doorway of her post office, ready to ride into the next chapter of their story. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. The road to Casper was familiar now. Cole had ridden it twice before, once alone, once with Vera. This time was different. This time, Nell was beside him on her own horse, a small sorrel mare that Vera had arranged, steady and calm, the kind of horse that would not spook at a bird or a sudden sound. Nell rode with her back straight and her hands light on the reins, the way her father had taught her. She did not complain about the pace or the distance or the dust. She rode the way she did everything, with the focused attention of someone who had learned that the world required her full presence. They made camp that night in the same hollow where Cole had camped on his way back from Cheyenne. He built a small fire, the first fire he had built in days, and they sat on opposite sides of it and ate the bread and cheese Vera had packed. The stars came out, dense and bright, spread across the sky like a field of winter wheat catching the light. "Cole," Nell said. "Yeah? What happens after the judge signs the papers?" "We go home. We plant the lavender along the south wall. We fix the fence. We figure out what comes next. And we stay together?" "We stay together." She was quiet for a moment. She was looking into the fire, her face half in shadow, the locket catching the light. "What about Hale?" Cole had been wondering when she would ask. He had been trying to figure out how to answer. "I'm going to find him," he said. "After the adoption is done, I'm going to find him and make sure he can't hurt you again. Can I help?" He looked at her across the fire. She was serious. She was not asking as a child asking for a game. She was asking as a partner, as someone who had been in the fight from the beginning and did not intend to be left out of the end of it. "You can help by staying safe," he said. "That's your job. My job is to make sure you have a safe place to stay safe in. We each do our part." She considered this. Then she nodded. "All right." She looked back into the fire. "But when you find him, I want to know. You'll know. Promise?" "Promise." They reached Casper the next afternoon. The town was bustling, the streets full of wagons and riders, and the particular energy of a place that was growing fast and did not intend to stop. Franklin Greer met them at the edge of town, standing on the boardwalk in front of his office, his spectacles catching the sun. He looked relieved when he saw them. "You made it," he said. "We made it." Greer looked at Nell. "Hello again, young lady." "Hello, Mr. Greer. I have good news. The judge has agreed to hear the adoption petition tomorrow morning. He's read the file. He's read the Croft statement. He's read the letter from Daniel Cade. I think he's already made up his mind, but we still need to show up and go through the formalities." Cole nodded. He felt the weight of the satchel on his shoulder, the weight of everything they had carried to this moment. "We'll be there." Greer led them to a boarding house near the courthouse, a clean, plain place run by a widow with kind eyes and a firm hand. She took one look at Nell and said, "I have a room with a window that faces the garden, and I have fresh pie in the kitchen." Nell looked at Cole. He nodded. She followed the widow inside, and Cole stood on the porch with Greer, watching the street. "Any word on Hale?" he asked. "Nothing official, but I have contacts in the Territorial Marshal's office. They're looking for him. He's disappeared since Briggs's arrest. No one has seen him in Denton Fork or anywhere else. He's not gone. He's waiting." "Probably." Greer adjusted his spectacles. "After tomorrow, you'll have legal standing. You'll be her father in the eyes of the law. That gives you the right to act on her behalf in any matter, including pursuing charges against Hale if he resurfaces. I don't need legal standing to find him." "No, but it helps if you catch him." Greer paused. "There's something else. Briggs's lawyers have filed a motion to have the charges dismissed on procedural grounds. It's a long shot, but it could delay the federal case. If the case is delayed, Hale could slip further away. Then we need to move fast. Tomorrow is the first step." Greer put his hand on Cole's shoulder. "Get some rest. You look like you haven't slept in a week." Cole had not slept well in a week, but he did not say that. He just nodded and went inside. The boarding house was quiet that evening. Nell ate a slice of pie at the kitchen table, her feet swinging, her eyes heavy. The widow fussed over her, bringing milk and more pie, and asking gentle questions that Nell answered with her usual careful precision. Cole sat at the end of the table and watched. He felt like a man who had been running for so long that he had forgotten how to stand still. But here, in this warm kitchen, with the smell of pie and the sound of a child's voice answering questions about whether she liked apples better than peaches, he felt something settle. Not peace exactly. Peace was too large a word for what he felt. But a quieting. A sense that the ground was solid beneath him, at least for this moment. He would take it. The courthouse the next morning was a stone building with tall windows and a door that creaked when it opened. Cole wore his cleanest shirt, the one Vera had pressed before they left. Nell wore the blue dress, the one she had worn to the first hearing, her hair braided tight, the locket against her chest. She held his hand as they walked up the steps. The courtroom was smaller than Cole had expected. A few rows of benches, a raised desk for the judge, a flag in the corner. Franklin Greer was already there, arranging papers on a table. He looked up when they entered and gave a small nod. The judge entered a few minutes later. He was an older man, white-haired, with a face that had seen enough cases to be unimpressed by most of them. He sat down, adjusted his spectacles, and looked at the papers before him. Petition for adoption of minor child Nell Cade by petitioner Cole Hargrove. He looked up. "I have reviewed the file. I have reviewed the supporting documentation. I have reviewed the federal investigation into the Bitter Creek land claims. I have also received a letter from the clerk of the court in Denton Fork, attesting to the character of Mr. Hargrove, signed by 14 members of the community." Cole felt Nell's hand tighten on his. The judge looked at them. "Mr. Hargrove, please stand." Cole stood. Nell stood beside him, still holding his hand. "Do you understand the responsibilities of legal guardianship and adoption under territorial law?" "I do." "Do you understand that this is a permanent commitment, not a temporary arrangement?" "I do." And do you swear to provide for this child's welfare, education, and moral upbringing to the best of your ability? Cole looked at Nell. She was looking up at him with those gray eyes, steady and waiting. I swear, he said. The judge looked at Nell. Young lady, do you understand what it means to be adopted? Yes, sir. It means he's my papa, and I'm his daughter, and nobody can take me away from him. The judge's expression softened, just slightly. That's a good understanding. He signed the paper with a scratch of the pen. He looked up. The petition is granted. Nell Cade is legally adopted by Cole Hargrove, effective immediately. Congratulations, Mr. Hargrove. You have a daughter. The gavel came down once. Cole stood there, holding Nell's hand, the paper in front of him, the words still sinking in. He had a daughter. She was looking up at him, and she was smiling. It was a small smile, cautious, as if she was not sure she was allowed to smile yet. But it was real. He smiled back. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was home. The courthouse steps were warm in the midday sun. Cole stood at the bottom with Nell's hand in his, the adoption paper folded inside his coat next to the locket chain he still carried, though the locket itself was back where it belonged around her neck. He looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and for a long moment neither of them said anything because the words were too big for the space between them. Then Nell tugged his hand and said, "Can we get pie?" Cole laughed. It came out rough and unpracticed, a sound he had not made in so long that it felt like a foreign language. But it was real. "Yes," he said, "we can get pie." They found a cafe on the main street, a narrow place with checkered cloths on the tables, and a woman behind the counter who looked at Nell and said, "You must be the little girl from the adoption hearing. I heard about you." Nell did not flinch. She looked back at the woman with those steady gray eyes and said, "Yes, ma'am, I'm Nell Hargrove now." The name landed in Cole's chest like a stone dropped into deep water. Nell Hargrove. He had not thought about the last name. He had not considered that she would take his name, that she would choose to carry it forward. But she had said it without hesitation, as if she had been practicing it in her head for days. The woman behind the counter smiled. "Well, Nell Hargrove, what kind of pie do you like?" "Apple," Nell said, "with a thick crust." "You've got good taste." The woman brought 2 slices and 2 cups of coffee, and a glass of milk for Nell that she set down with a small wink. Nell picked up her fork and ate with the same careful attention she brought to everything, cutting each bite into precise pieces, chewing slowly, savoring. Cole watched her and felt the shape of his life rearranging itself around her presence. He had spent 3 years building an emptiness, a deliberate void where nothing could grow. And now there was a child sitting across from him, eating apple pie, wearing his last name, and the void was filling in whether he was ready or not. They stayed in Casper one more night. Greer had advised them to wait until the next morning to ride back, to give the legal paperwork time to be filed and recorded. Cole agreed, not because he was worried about the paperwork, but because Nell looked tired, and the boarding house had a soft bed, and the widow had promised another pie for breakfast. That evening they sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the street settle into dusk. Lanterns were being lit, one by one, casting pools of yellow light on the boardwalk. A man played a fiddle somewhere down the street, the notes drifting through the cooling air like smoke. Nell sat on the step beside Cole, her knees drawn up, her arms wrapped around them. She was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that did not need to be filled. "Cole," she said finally. "Yeah? Do you think my mama and papa know? That I'm safe now?" Cole looked at the sky, at the first stars appearing in the deep blue above the rooftops. He thought about Sarah and Henry, about the way he had spoken to them in the dark on nights when the grief was too heavy to carry alone. He did not know if the dead could hear, but he knew that speaking to them made the weight lighter. "I think they know," he said. "I think they were watching the whole time, and I think they're proud of you." Nell was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned her head against his arm. "Good," she said, "because I tried really hard." "I know you did. You did good." They sat on the porch until the stars were thick and the fiddle player had gone to bed. Then Cole carried her inside, her head on his shoulder, her breath slow and even. He laid her on the bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin. She murmured something in her sleep, a word he could not catch, and turned her face toward the wall. He stood there for a moment looking at her. Then he went to his own room and lay down on the narrow bed, and stared at the ceiling, and let himself feel the full weight of what had happened. He had a daughter. He had a reason to stay. He had something to lose. They rode out at dawn. The road to Denton Fork was long, but the weather held clear, and the horses were fresh, and they made good time. Nell rode her sorrel mare with growing confidence, no longer holding the reins too tight, no longer checking over her shoulder every few minutes. She was learning to trust the road. Cole watched her and said nothing, because some things could not be taught, only earned. They stopped at midday in a grove of cottonwoods beside a creek. Cole unpacked the bread and cheese Vera had sent, and they sat on a blanket and ate in the shade. A blue heron stood motionless in the shallows downstream, watching the water with the patience of something that had never learned to hurry. "Cole," Nell said, her mouth half full of bread, "when we get home, can we plant the lavender?" "Soon as we find the seeds. Vera said she has some. She said she's been saving them for a special occasion." "Then I guess this is a special occasion." Nell nodded, satisfied. She went back to her bread. Cole looked at the heron, at the water, at the long grass bending in the breeze. The word home rolled around in his mind. It had been a long time since he had used that word to mean anything other than a place where he slept. Now it meant something else. It meant a place where a child planted lavender. It meant a porch where a girl sat and watched the stars. It meant a future. They reached Denton Fork as the afternoon was lengthening into evening. The town looked the same as it always had. Dusty streets, wooden storefronts, the church steeple catching the last of the sun. But it felt different. It felt like a place where Cole belonged. People nodded to him as he rode past. Franklin Pryor raised a hand from the hardware store porch. Pearl Hutchkins waved from the church steps. The town had been watching, and the town had chosen sides. Vera was on the post office porch, her arms folded, her face doing its best to look stern and failing because the corners of her mouth were twitching. She watched them dismount and walk toward her, and then she said, "Well, it's about time." "Good to see you too, Vera." "Don't get smart with me. I've been worried sick, and you didn't send a telegram." "We were riding." "You could have sent a telegram from Casper. There's a telegraph office there. I know because I use it." Cole held up his hands. "I'm sorry. I should have sent a telegram." "Yes, you should have." Vera looked at Nell. Her expression softened. "Hello, honey." "Hello, Vera. Come here." Nell walked into Vera's arms, and Vera held her for a long moment, the way a woman held a child she had fought for and nearly lost. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. "You look good. You look like you've been eating properly." "We had pie," Nell said. "Twice." "Twice? Well, that's a proper adoption." Vera looked at Cole over Nell's head. "You did it. We did it. Don't get modest. You did it." Cole shook his head. He did not have the words for what he felt, so he did not try. He just stood on the porch of the post office in Denton Fork with his daughter beside him and a woman who had become something like family in front of him, and he let himself feel it. The next few days were a slow settling. Cole took Nell to the ranch, his ranch, now their ranch, and she stood in the yard and looked at the sagging fence and the overgrown garden and the barn that needed a new roof and said, "We have a lot of work to do." "Yes, we do." "Good," she said. "I like work." And she meant it. They started with the house. Cole swept out the dust and the dirt and the evidence of 3 years of neglect. Nell found a rag and a bucket and started washing the windows, standing on a crate to reach the top panes, her tongue poking out in concentration. She sang while she worked, the same tuneless humming she had used to keep the dark away on the night by the well. But now the humming was lighter, a sound that had no weight. Cole joined her on the second day. He found himself whistling, an old tune he had not thought about in years, a song Sarah used to hum when she was cooking. He stopped when he realized what he was doing. Then he kept going. The third day, Vera arrived with a wagon full of supplies: flour, sugar, nails, a new shovel, and a small paper packet of lavender seeds. She also brought a letter, which she handed to Cole with a look that meant it was important. He opened it while Nell was inspecting the seeds. The letter was from Franklin Greer. "The federal case against Briggs is proceeding. His lawyers have filed multiple motions to delay, but the judge is not sympathetic. I expect a trial date within the month. However, I have received word that Clement Hale has been seen in Laramie. He is lying low, but he is still active. I advise caution. He may attempt to contact you or the child. Keep your eyes open." Cole read the letter twice. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket. He did not tell Nell. Not yet. The lavender planting became a ceremony. Vera stayed to watch. Nell dug the small holes along the south wall, where the sun hit longest, where the soil was warmest. She placed each seed with the care of someone who understood that small things could grow into large things if they were given time and attention. Cole covered the seeds with soil and tamped it down gently. Nell poured water from a tin cup, a slow stream, careful not to wash the seeds away. When they were done, she sat back on her heels and looked at the row of small mounds. "They'll come up in spring," she said. "Yes, and every year after that without being asked. That's what I'm told." She pressed her hand flat on the soil, as if she could feel the seeds waiting beneath. "Mama would have liked this." "I think so too." Vera watched from the porch, her arms folded, her face unreadable. Then she turned and went inside to start supper, leaving them alone in the garden. That night, after Vera had gone home and Nell was asleep, Cole sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and the letter from Greer in his pocket. The stars were out, bright and cold. The wind moved through the cottonwoods near the creek, a sound like water running over stones. He thought about Hale. He thought about the way the man had looked at him on the road, the way he had smiled with the flat coldness of a man who believed he would always have the upper hand. Hale was still out there. He was lying low, but he was not done. Men like Hale did not disappear. They waited, and they came back when you least expected them. Cole could not let that happen. He could not live the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for Hale to emerge from the shadows. He had to end it. But ending it meant leaving again. It meant riding to Laramie, tracking Hale down and doing what needed to be done. And leaving meant leaving Nell. He had just promised her he would stay. He had just signed papers that made him her father. And now he was considering riding into danger and leaving her behind. The weight of it pressed down on him, heavy and cold. He was still sitting on the porch when the door opened behind him. Nell came out in her nightgown, her feet bare, her hair loose. She did not say anything. She just sat down beside him on the step and leaned against his arm. "Can't sleep," she said. "Me neither. What are you thinking about?" He looked at her. The starlight caught her face, made her look older than her years. She had already seen too much, carried too much. He did not want to add to her burdens. But he had also learned that she could tell when he was hiding something. "I'm thinking about Clement Hale," he said. She did not flinch. She had known. "He's still out there." "Yes." "You want to go after him?" "I don't want to, but I think I have to." She was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the grass, a soft sigh. Then she said, "Will you come back?" He looked at her. The question was not a challenge. It was a simple request for the truth. "Yes," he said, "I will come back." "Promise?" "I promise." She nodded. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then go. But come back soon." They sat on the porch until the moon rose and the night grew cold. Then Cole carried her inside, tucked her into bed, and stood in the doorway looking at her. He would leave in the morning. He would ride to Laramie. He would find Clement Hale, and he would end this. For her, for them, for the future they were building. He closed the door softly and went to pack. Cole left before dawn, the same way he had left before the ride to Cheyenne, the same way he had left 100 times in 100 different places. But this time was different. This time, he had a reason to come back. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom and watched Nell sleep for a long moment, her face soft in the gray light, her hand loose on the pillow beside her cheek. The locket was visible at the edge of the blanket, rising and falling with each slow breath. He had left a note on the kitchen table, weighted down with the salt cellar. "Gone to Laramie. Will be back before the lavender needs watering. I keep my promises. Cole." He did not say where he was going or why. She knew. She had known last night on the porch, and she had given him her blessing, and that blessing was the most precious thing he had ever been given. The road to Laramie was long and empty. The country opened into high plains, rolling and stark, with the mountains a constant presence on the western horizon. Cole rode hard, pushing Cinder but not punishing her, stopping at intervals to let her rest and water. The miles passed under the mare's hooves, and Cole used the time to think. He thought about Hale. He thought about the way the man moved through the world, never leaving marks, always staying one step ahead. He was not a man who could be cornered easily. He was a man who had escape routes built into every plan. But he was also a man who could not stay hidden forever. He had a pattern, a need to be close to the action, to watch his plans unfold. He would not have gone far from the center of things. Laramie was a hub, railroads, telegraph lines, money moving through in both directions. It was the kind of place where a man like Hale could disappear in plain sight. Cole reached Laramie in the late afternoon of the second day. The town was larger than Casper, busier, with the raw energy of a place that had been built fast and was still growing. The streets were crowded with wagons and riders, and men in suits carrying briefcases. Cole found a livery and stabled Cinder, then walked to the telegraph office. He sent a message to Vera. "Arrived Laramie. Will send word when I have news. Keep Nell safe." Then he went looking for the federal marshal's office. The marshal in Laramie was a man named Everett Cross, a lean man with a graying mustache and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much of the worst that people could do. He listened to Cole's story without interrupting, reading the documents Cole had brought. The Croft statement, the letter from Daniel Cade, the adoption papers that made Nell his daughter. When Cole finished, Cross leaned back in his chair and looked at him. "You've done a lot of work," he said. "I had help. The girl. And Vera Hutchkins. And Franklin Greer." Cross nodded. "I've heard about the Briggs case. It's been moving through the federal system. Briggs is in custody, and his lawyers are fighting the charges. But the evidence is solid. He's not getting out. Hale is still free. Yes, and I've had reports that he's been seen in Laramie. But he's careful. He doesn't stay in one place long. Where would he go?" Cross thought about it. "There's a boarding house on the south side, the kind of place where men go when they don't want to be asked questions. He's been seen there twice, but he's not registered under his own name." "What name does he use?" "That's the problem. We don't know." Cole left the marshal's office with the address of the boarding house and a feeling that he was close. The boarding house was a narrow building wedged between a saloon and a feed store, with a faded sign that read, "Rooms by the week." The windows were dark, the curtains drawn. Cole knocked on the door. A woman opened it, thin and tired, her eyes scanning him with the practiced suspicion of someone who had learned not to trust strangers. "I'm looking for a man," Cole said. "Clement Hale." "He may be using a different name. I don't know anyone by that name. He's about my height, well-dressed, quiet, moves like he's always watching." The woman's expression flickered. Just a flicker, but it was enough. "I don't know anyone like that. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to bring him to justice. He's wanted for conspiracy and fraud. He's involved in the deaths of innocent people." The woman looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "He was here. He left this morning. He said he was heading south." "South where?" "He didn't say, but he mentioned a place called Iron Creek, said he had business there." Cole thanked her and walked away. Iron Creek was a day's ride south, a small settlement at the edge of the territory, the kind of place where a man could disappear into the mountains and never be found again. Hale was running. He knew the net was closing, and he was heading for the last place where he could slip through. Cole went back to the livery, saddled Cinder, and rode south. The country changed as he traveled. The plains gave way to foothills, the foothills to steeper ground, with pine forests and rocky outcroppings, and the sound of water running fast somewhere below. The air grew cooler, smelling of pine and damp earth. Cole pushed on past dark, using the stars to guide him, stopping only when Cinder was too tired to continue. He made a cold camp in a stand of pines, no fire, no light, and slept with his hand on his rifle. He dreamed of Nell. She was standing in the garden, the lavender blooming around her, her hands covered in soil. She was laughing, a sound he had heard only a few times, a sound he wanted to hear every day for the rest of his life. He woke with the first light and rode on. He reached Iron Creek by midday. The settlement was a handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads, a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a few houses. It was the kind of place where strangers were noticed, and Cole was noticed the moment he rode in. He tied Cinder at the rail in front of the saloon and went inside. The saloon was dim and smelled of stale beer and old tobacco. A few men sat at tables, playing cards, drinking. They looked up when he entered and looked away, the way men looked away when they did not want to be involved. Cole walked to the bar. The bartender was a heavy-set man with a scar across his chin. He looked at Cole without interest. "What can I get you?" "Information. I'm looking for a man, Clement Hale. He might be using a different name. Well-dressed, quiet, travels alone." The bartender's eyes did not change. He wiped a glass with a rag and set it down. "I don't know anyone by that name. He would have come through in the past day or two, heading south, maybe toward the mountains." The bartender was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There was a man, came in yesterday, didn't say much, paid cash for a bottle and left. Didn't give a name." "Which way did he go?" "South, toward the pass." Cole nodded. He laid a coin on the bar and walked out. The pass was a narrow cut through the mountains, the only route south into the next territory. If Hale made it through, he would be beyond the reach of the federal warrant for weeks, maybe months. Cole had to stop him before he reached the pass. He pushed Cinder hard, following the road as it climbed into the mountains. The trees grew thicker, the air thinner. The road narrowed to a track, then to a trail. He rounded a bend and saw a horse tied to a tree ahead. A man was sitting on a rock at the side of the trail, a rifle across his knees, waiting. Clement Hale. He looked up as Cole approached, and that same flat smile spread across his face. "Mr. Hargrove, I was wondering when you would catch up." Cole dismounted. He kept his hand near his rifle, but he did not raise it. "Not yet." "It's over, Hale. Briggs is in custody. The federal case is moving forward. There's nowhere left to run." "There's always somewhere to run. The territory is vast. The mountains go on for hundreds of miles. I know paths that no one else knows. And you'll spend the rest of your life running. Is that what you want?" Hale's smile did not waver. "What I want is to finish what I started. You took the girl, you took Briggs, but you haven't taken me. I'm not here to take you. I'm here to bring you in. There's a federal marshal waiting in Laramie. You can come peacefully, or you can come in chains. Your choice." Hale laughed. It was a dry sound, like leaves scraping against stone. "You think you can take me?" "You, a broken-down drifter with a dead son and a wife who died in a fire? You think you're the man to bring me in?" The words landed like blows. Cole felt them hit, felt the old wounds open. But he had learned something in the past weeks. He had learned that the past could not be changed, but it could be carried. It could be carried without letting it define him. "You can say whatever you want about me," Cole said. "It doesn't change what you did. It doesn't change the families you destroyed. It doesn't change the fact that Nell Cade is my daughter now, and I will do whatever it takes to keep her safe, including putting you in the ground if I have to." Something shifted in Hale's eyes. The smile faltered. He had been counting on Cole's grief, on the weight of his past, to slow him down. But Cole had moved past that weight. He had found something heavier to carry, love for a child, a reason to fight. Hale stood up slowly. He kept the rifle in his hands, but he did not raise it. "You're not going to shoot me," he said. "You're not that kind of man. You don't know what kind of man I am." "I know. I've studied you. You're a man who wants to do the right thing. And the right thing is bringing me in alive to face justice. Killing me would be easy, but it wouldn't be right. And you can't live with yourself if you do the easy thing instead of the right thing." Cole looked at him. Hale was right. He wanted to pull the trigger. He wanted to end this with one clean shot and never have to think about Clement Hale again. But that would make him no better than the men he had been fighting. That would make him the kind of man Nell did not deserve. "You're right," Cole said. "I'm not going to shoot you." He lowered his rifle. Hale's smile returned, and then Cole said, "But I don't have to, because I'm not the one who's going to bring you in." He stepped aside. Behind him, on the trail, a horse came into view. Two horses. One carried a rider in a marshal's coat. Marshal Cross had followed him. Cole had sent a telegram from the livery before he left Laramie, asking Cross to ride south and meet him at Iron Creek. Cross had made good time. Hale's face went pale. The smile vanished. He looked at Cole, and for the first time something like fear flickered behind his eyes. "You planned this. I planned to give you a choice." "You chose wrong." Marshal Cross dismounted and walked toward Hale. He was calm, unhurried, the way a man walked when he held all the cards. "Clement Hale, you are under arrest on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and complicity in the deaths of Daniel and Ruth Cade. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to counsel. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law." Hale did not resist. He stood still while Cross took his rifle and his pistol and put him in irons. He looked at Cole one last time. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is." Hale said nothing else. Cross led him to his horse and helped him mount. Then he looked at Cole. "You did good work, Hargrove. The territory owes you a debt." "I didn't do it for the territory. I did it for my daughter." Cross nodded. He turned his horse and led Hale back down the trail toward Laramie. Cole watched them go until they were out of sight. Then he stood alone in the mountain pass, the wind moving through the pines, the sun warm on his face. He felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt finished. He rode back to Denton Fork at an easy pace, not pushing, not hurrying. The country was beautiful in the autumn light, the aspens turning gold, the sky a deep and endless blue. He stopped at the creek where he and Nell had eaten bread and cheese, and he sat on the blanket and watched the water and thought about the road ahead. He had a daughter. He had a ranch that needed fixing. He had lavender seeds in the ground, waiting for spring. He had a life. He reached the ranch in the late afternoon of the fourth day. The light was long and golden, and the house looked small and solid and welcoming. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Vera was on the porch, and Nell was standing in the yard, and when she saw him, she started running. She ran across the yard, her braids flying, her boots kicking up dust, and she threw herself into his arms before he was even off the horse. He caught her and held her tight, the locket pressing between them, her small hands gripping his coat. "You came back," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I said I would." "I know, but I still worried." "I know you did. I'm sorry." She pulled back and looked at him, her eyes red but her face steady. "Did you find him?" "Yes." "Is he gone?" "He's in custody." "He's not coming back." She looked at him for a long moment, reading his face the way she always read his face, looking for the truth. Then she nodded. "Good." She took his hand. "Come see the garden. I watered it every day." She led him to the south wall, where the small mounds of soil were still visible, neat and tended. She knelt and touched one gently. "They're going to come up in spring." "Yes, they are." "And every year after that." "Every year." She looked up at him. "We're going to be here for a long time, aren't we?" "Yes, we are." She pressed her hand flat on the soil, the same way she had pressed it on the grave, the same way she had pressed it on the telegraph paper. She was building something permanent. She was claiming this ground. "Good," she said, "because I have a lot of plans." Vera came down from the porch and stood beside them. She looked at the garden, at Cole, at Nell, and she did not say anything. She just put her hand on Cole's arm and squeezed once. Then she turned and went inside to start supper. Cole and Nell stayed in the garden until the sun went down. The light faded from gold to pink to a deep violet that settled over the mountains like a blanket. The first stars appeared, faint and distant. Nell leaned against Cole's side, her head against his arm, her hand still resting on the soil. "Cole," she said. "Yeah? I'm glad you turned around." He knew what she meant. She meant the smoke. She meant the day he almost rode past. She meant the choice that had led him to her. "Me too," he said. "Me too." They sat there for a long time, a man and a girl, in the quiet of the Wyoming evening. The wind moved through the grass. The stars came out one by one. The house behind them was warm and lit and full of the smell of supper. And in the garden along the south wall, invisible beneath the soil, the lavender seeds were waiting for spring. They had been planted deep, and they would rise. They would come back every year, without being asked. They would be permanent. And so would they. This is Clint Dawson, and you've been listening to Frontier Heart Audio. Until next time, keep your heart open and your trails safe.